Analog thoughts.
Analogue thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Skiddly scram scram and doodly doo doo. Yeah. Yo, how are we feeling? We okay? We doing good? Take a minute. Take a breath. Okay. My name is Steven, aka Mount Analogue. This is my podcast where we explore history, science, technology, spirituality, and a variety of other topics that make our reality so great. If this is your first time joining us, hello. If this is your 30-something time, hello. If this is your somewhere in between those two values time, hello. Hope you're doing great. I had this cool thought about art the other day, and it wasn't a thought that I've never had before. It wasn't this like grand epiphany. It was just like I got this cosmic reminder. And when I say art, I mean all of the arts: music, painting, sculpting, cinema, all of that. But here's what's cool about all art. I'll say, for example, think of like a music album. Each song is a snapshot of an emotion or an experience that gets refined and then presented. It's the same for a book. An author takes all of these experiences and ideas and emotions and distills them. They strip them down to their raw essence. Then they redistribute them in a creative way. They weave them into a tale, or musicians weave them into a song, or a painter reimagines them through their brushstrokes. They take the raw emotions and show them to us in interesting ways. That's what an artist does. And this is all so important in building culture and understanding the human experience. It builds bridges of empathy because people engage with art and say, I feel this too, or I've felt this too. I'm going through this. And it helps people realize on different levels, of course, that we are all going through similar things. We all suffer. We all experience joy. And art is a creative way of reminding us that we're all going through this together. So anyway, I thought that I'd share that little nugget with y'all, and I want to encourage you yourselves to keep creating whatever the thing is you're making and keep sharing that. It doesn't have to be a drawing. It doesn't have to be a painting or a song. Whatever you make might be inspiration, or it might be education, or it might be emotional education, or whatever the thing is that you're doing that you feel is helping you connect to your reality and helping others to connect to their reality. Keep doing it, keep creating, and keep sharing, because it's so important. I like to start the show off by giving a brief update on myself and my son, Felix. Personally, I've kind of been all over the place mentally. I've still been working on projects and moving forward with writing and obviously podcasting and such, but I am just so concerned with America right now. And I don't want this to be a political thing. This is not a political podcast at all. So I generally try to keep politics off this show. But god damn, at the time of recording this, the inauguration was yesterday. And just what a circus, what a cartoon. The chaos and the madness and assembling of fascist billionaire powers. It doesn't feel real. And realistically, you're listening to this and you're either pissed like me or you're stoked. Or maybe you're somehow super detached from all of this and it isn't really infesting your thoughts that much. I envy that in a way. I wish I could detach myself more from this than I am. But the portly orange man is starting his mass deportation. Started it yesterday. It began yesterday, and you just need to know your rights and be safe. And honestly, I'm so sorry for everyone that's swept up in this chaos. Like, I am living a super privileged existence, having been born on this part of the space rock, and I feel so bad that there are these lines that super rich people say other people aren't allowed to cross. And you can say what you think. You can think what you want about this, but at the end of the day, it is wrong and it is unfair. If you look into what it actually takes to become a U.S. citizen here, it is goddamn ridiculous. And if you're struggling in another country, it's next to impossible. It's designed that way. This country at one time was known for being a safe haven for people in other parts of the world who were looking to start a new life, and they'd be welcomed to a melting pot of cultures and ethnicities and backgrounds, and now the United States is not that. People can't come here. We're closing our borders and people are getting kicked out of here. Even naturalized citizens are at risk of deportation at this point. So anyway, like I said, I'm not going to go super long-winded about this, although I could. And I thought about doing an entire podcast on all of this, just all of these heinous things that are unfolding. But this is not a political podcast, so I don't think I'm going to do that. I feel like there are endless streams of sources for this information. But if you are genuinely curious about my thoughts or feelings or emotions, please don't hesitate to ask. I'm on all of the social media things. Mount Analogue, MT, period, Analogue, spelled like the analog in this episode or on this podcast. So MT period ANALOGUE. Reach out if you need to talk or want to get my point of view on how things are unfolding, because this is a real mess. And this is pretty, yeah, okay, it's something. Let's move forward. My son, Felix, he is reading really well. He's sounding out words. He's 2.5, and he knows the whole alphabet. He knows what sound each letter makes. He recognizes several words by sight, and he can sound words out when you show them to him. He'll sound them out letter by letter. He's a genius. And he will do great things. He is my heart, and he is the sweetest boy. Okay, so I'm a mess. Felix is thriving, and the U.S. is crumbling. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. I'm just kidding. It's not. It's really not the end of the world. We're going to get through this. We're going to overcome. We're going to do it. Why did I pick today's topic? Why did I pick today's topic? I did an episode on things history got wrong some episodes back, and I thought it only fair to point the finger at the errors of the scientific world as well. Because why not? We did history, let's do science. And just a little disclaimer here. I promise I'm going to get into the meat of this episode very soon. I know I'm creeping on like 10 minutes at this point for an intro, but here we are. Just a little disclaimer here. I do not know anything about anything. I am not a scientist. I'm not a historian. I'm not a teacher. I'm not any of that. The last episode I put out, I had a troll hitting me up in my comments on a post I made about quantum computers, saying that I don't know anything about them. And I promptly reminded this troll that I make it very clear on my podcast that I am not an authority on really anything. I am a musician, an artist, and a writer guy. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a computer scientist. I just, honestly, what I do is I research stuff and I share what I've read. I research stuff, take a bunch of notes, watch a bunch of videos, read some books, read articles, and I write stuff down and I share it in front of a microphone. That's it. So, this same troll that I'm talking about had the audacity to suggest that my show was an AI script. That I just said, write me a script, AI, and tell me about X, Y, or Z. And I was honestly so mad at that because I want to make it very, very, very clear. The only part of this show that is generated by AI is the segment of the show called Let's Ask AI, where I ask AI a question. Other than that, nothing, I repeat, nothing else on this show is an AI script. Literally, this takes hours and hours of research and notes and recording. So that really made me upset. So the troll that will remain nameless can eat my butt. Eat my butt. This is all from the heart, and I spend a lot of time taking notes on information and reading things and watching videos. And honestly, this all takes a really, really long time. So don't insult me like that. You know, if you have critiques about the show, that's fine. If you're like, yo, you got this wrong, that's fine. But don't insinuate that I am using an AI script, because it could not be further from the truth. And even though I'm not a scientist or mathematician or historian, I do a lot of fact checking. I try to provide the most accurate and vetted information I can because there is a lot of misinformation online. So, yeah, that little insult really touched a nerve with me and could not have been further from the truth. All right, my rant my rant on that in the spicy drama section of the podcast is over. Speaking of the countless hours I spend on this podcast, if you'd like to support the podcast, consider leaving a rating or review or sharing a link or all that good stuff. If you'd like to take it a step further, I have a Patreon where you get early access to episodes, art, music, stuff like that. That link will be in the show's notes. Okay, without further ado, let's get into some things that science got wrong. The first thing I'd like to talk about is something I'm sure we've all heard about. It's something they talked about in grade school, and I feel like it sets the tone for where this episode is headed. We used to believe that Earth was at the center of the universe, and that everything, including our sun, revolved around it in perfect circles. A geocentric model. And if you go outside and look up day or night, you could see how this makes sense, because stars move around us while we appear to be kind of staying still, and this theory of space and our universe persisted for a very long time until Copernicus and Galileo and others presented solid evidence that supported the heliocentric model of the universe, which placed our sun in the middle of the solar system and all of the planets revolving around it. And the heliocentric model was not widely accepted for a long time after being proposed for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons that people were apprehensive to accept this model of the universe was the retrograde motion of other planets, where other planets appeared to move in reverse or change their speed. And we later discovered that the planets weren't actually moving in reverse at all. Rather, faster planets and celestial objects were passing by them, giving the illusion that they were moving backwards or slowing down. It's kind of like, I wrote this example down. I don't know if it's going to land, but have you ever been in a parking lot and let's say you've got cars on the left and right of you. You're in a parking space and you're not quite like looking out the windows. You're maybe like looking down at your phone or whatever. And you see one of the cars on your left or right, or maybe both cars, they pull out of their parking spaces beside you, and in your peripheries you see them, and you get that little moment just for a split second where you're like, why is my car moving? Or I don't know if that's ever happened to you, but it's happened to me where it's an optical illusion. Kepler, for which the Kepler telescope was named after, found that planets' orbits weren't perfect circles, but that they were actually ellipses, and their orbits would speed up the closer the planet got to the sun. And Copernicus and Galileo weren't the first to propose this thought of the heliocentric model of the universe. It was actually proposed as early as the 3rd century BC. And then in the 5th century BC, Greek philosophers had the thought that Earth was spherical and that it was revolving around a mystical central fire, and that this fire regulated the universe, which is kind of true. I mean, our sun regulates the planets in our solar system, so they weren't too far off from the mark. They kind of were thinking about it in a more mystical way rather than a scientific way. But as I've said before on this podcast, there's a Venn diagram of mysticism and science that somewhere in the middle is where the truth is. Like, before you understand the science, it's magic, and then over here we've got hard science. They converge, and we've got this little nugget in the middle. It's like, that's where the truth's in there somewhere, like between the things we know and the things we can't comprehend. So they were onto it. The Greeks knew a lot. The Greeks figured out a lot. So like I said, Galileo and Copernicus weren't actually the first to propose the heliocentric model of the universe. They really just brought it to the masses in a big way. It's like how Elvis didn't invent rock and roll, but he helped make it a household genre and popularized it. And his hips did a lot of the work at the end of the day. Or it's like, if you like electronic music, it's like how Skrillex didn't invent dubstep, but he helped bring it to the masses. So you get the picture here. This was an idea that was kind of marinating on the back burner, and then once Galileo and Copernicus and others had these telescopes and these instruments to actually prove the heliocentric model, they were able to say this is definitively the way that our universe is functioning. And there was backlash from this new theory about the way the universe worked, not only because there's always backlash whenever something as solid or something as solidified as the way the solar system works and the universe works and planets work, something like this is like telling someone that oxygen doesn't work the way that it works today. It would be like saying that, like, yeah, oxygen, you're not actually breathing oxygen, sorry. It'd be like saying that. People would be like, what? What are you talking about? So there was a resistance because it was such a universally accepted thing that we were the center of the universe, and people weren't willing to accept it. But there was also a big resistance from the church, the Catholic Church, of course. The most famous case is Galileo being put on house arrest in 1633 for promoting the heliocentric theory. And while he wasn't executed, which was a common thing in Europe for going against the word of the church, the scientific word of the church, I don't want to say common, but it did happen. And they didn't execute Galileo, but he was forced to formally recant his views and spent the last years of his life under confinement. And this was all because apparently in the Bible there are indications of the earth being at the center of the universe, which is weird because I've read the Bible like front to back, and I don't really remember. I don't remember a lot of it because there's so much to the Bible, but I don't remember anything like specifically standing out that was like, we are the center. This is the center. God made this the center. But then again, I'm not a priest. I'm not a like theologian, Christian theology major or anything. So it's probably in there. And the church didn't like that. Galileo was saying the Bible wasn't right, essentially. And eventually things changed, obviously. We realized we're not the center of the universe, and the church changed their stance and probably made it so the Bible didn't look bad. They're like, oh yeah, no, this scripture actually meant this, not what we were saying. But could you imagine that like of course we're like people were I'm sure people were like, of course we're the center of the universe. And then like once once we discovered we weren't, the egos were just shattered. People just had their ego shattered. I want to switch lanes here, or like change gears here. The next thing I want to talk about that history got wrong is more so it kind of has an element of shock value. And it kind of has this element of like it's not necessarily, I mean well, I'll just explain it. In the United States and Europe, radioactive products from the 1920s through the 1940s, including toothpaste, hair cream, cosmetics, and even suppositories, contained radium. So there weren't as many products that contained radium as were advertised, because radium was actually really expensive to put on things, which actually turns out to be a good thing for the people buying them, because obviously radium exposure can result in radiation-induced cancer, which this just seems so flabbergastedly wrong. Like, how did companies get to this conclusion? And if you connect the dots, it kind of makes sense. It doesn't make sense now that we know what we know about radiation, but during this time in the 1920s and 1940s, like before that, in the 1800s, we had figured out that radiation actually helped with killing. It actually helped with cancer and killing cancerous cells. It was well known. It was big news, but we also still didn't understand it moving into the 1900s. We didn't fully understand how all this was working. So a bunch of companies decided to piggyback off this hype and put out a bunch of products that had or claimed to have radium. And you can see pictures of this stuff online. It's really wild. There's like face creams where there's like some of the art. I remember one of the pieces of art is like a lady opening up a piece of face cream, and she has this like blinding light shining into her face as she's rubbing the cream on her face, and it's like, irradiate your face. It's crazy. It's really crazy. And they actually even beyond cosmetic stuff, I think I already mentioned they had soda and cookware, and they had glasses that you could fill with water. They had irradiated glasses, or they had radium lined glasses where you'd pour the water in, and it was meant to irradiate the water. And then the thought here, obviously, was that radiation in general was just good for you. If it was good for killing cancer, it's got to just be good for you. It's killing all the bad stuff in you. They didn't understand that, like, no, that's not how it works. It's not a secret remedy it's just another case of snake oil. It's another case of like, buy this product and it will solve all your problems. If you've ever played Fallout, which is it's supposed to be like this future that never was, that really idolizes the 1950s. I feel like there's some parallels here where like radiation and like things you're not supposed to eat or consume are like good for you, like air quote good for you. If you've ever played Fallout or watched the show, you can appreciate these parallels or this insanity. And I feel like even in 90s cartoons and comic books, they sort of mocked this mass spread of misinformation and distribution of like poisonous scam products. Like don't forget your lead mints. The lead mints will keep your brain sharp and your breath fresh. Like, nope, lead's just poison, brother. It's not funny. It's not funny, but yeah. We used to think all kinds of poisons were safe to consume. We used to make lead pipes, and doctors used to smoke cigarettes. We just didn't know any better. And there wasn't as much information on the effects of things we would put into our bodies. Like, I remember this story my grandma told me a long time ago where her and her family would go grocery shopping, and there would literally just be products with no information at all on the boxes or the cans. And you just like, okay, so you'd pick up like a box of cereal and it would just say brand flakes, nothing else. No ingredients or little label telling you nutritional facts or serving sizes. All of that stuff is really kind of a modern thing. Speaking of that, and kind of in this vein, did you see that they finally, in the United States, just banned red food dye number 3? It's been illegal to put in cosmetics for a long time because it was proven to cause cancer. So they were like, don't put it in the makeup. But it's been allowed in our food until just recently, like last month or maybe this month. Like it just happened. It's insane. I might actually do an episode on how all the food is poison in the United States, and I think that episode might be coming soon because it's pretty insane, the story behind how we got to this point of processed food. And I feel like the people need to know with my expertise, with my expert knowledge on food science. Moving forward to our next thing that science got wrong. This one is going to kind of be a short one. I'm not going to, I don't have as much to say on this as I did the other things. But our next thing that science got wrong is this concept of spontaneous generation. And this is something that humans believed up until the mid 1800s. Many scientists believed that life could spontaneously arise from non-living matter, like maggots from rotting meat or mice from dirty rags and wheat. And Louis Pasteur, who I'm going to talk a little bit more about, definitively disproved this through his experiments. And it was actually something that, like I said, people believed for a ridiculously long time. And they just thought that if the conditions were right, things would just materialize, that organisms arose out of nothing. And on a level, this is like true to a degree. For instance, if you leave out like bread or food in a warm, damp room, it's going to grow mold on it. It just will eventually. So people kind of took this concept, this fact, and I'm just using mold and bread here as an example. Not everything works like this, but they took this premise and they applied it to countless living things. Like they thought, if you took a bunch of empty seashells and put them in a bucket with seawater, that a crab could materialize out of those conditions. They thought that the conditions of the environment would generate a creature, an animal. That's the sort of thought process behind spontaneous generation. It's pretty wild. But also, if you got to put yourself in their shoes, and not to justify the theory of spontaneous generation, but if you're living a long time ago, you don't have access to a lot of information or books. You probably can't read. Like most of the world could not read for a long time, and you're looking for answers on how things work, and you're trying to make sense of the world. I could see how it would make sense. It doesn't make sense, but obviously I understand how people come to these conclusions. And on another level too, like if you think about Earth, where did we come from? And I have my theories and I have my ideas on where we came from, but no one really knows. And if you're not looking, if you're not a religious person, if you're like, yeah, the whole God thing, okay, whatever. But if you're looking at it through a scientific lens and you're living in this time period, you start to wonder, did non-living material get like positioned in the perfect way, then struck by lightning, and then life appeared? They were trying to piece reality together, and this was the best way that they could rationalize, not rationalize, but this is the best way they could come up with things just existing. It was a theory on how things came to exist, essentially. Not a great one, but a theory nonetheless. The next thing that history got wrong is kind of in a different lane as well. It's this theoretical substance called the luminiferous ether. And physicists and scientists thought that this luminiferous ether filled the universe and allowed light to travel through empty space. The term luminiferous means light bearing. So let's kind of break this down, because the premise here, it sounds more complicated than it is, but it's actually pretty simple. We used to think that light was just a wave. And light travels through space from the sun and all the stars, travels through space, which is a vacuum. And we used to think, or we still think to some extent, that waves aren't supposed to be able to travel through a vacuum. That's the premise here. Light is a wave, space is a vacuum. How is light getting from the sun to Earth or anywhere if waves can't travel through a vacuum? So there had to be an explanation for this, some way that light was able to pass through the vacuum. And the answer that physicists came up with was the luminiferous ether. The theory suggests that there was this infinite material that wasn't affected by objects moving through it, that the light was traveling on, and that Earth and everything else was passing through this material, and that's how we were able to experience light. It's kind of like a blanket of light that objects can pass through. We later discovered that light is both a particle and a wave. And it's actually way more complex than that. But just to simplify it, that's what physicists later realized, is that this luminiferous ether doesn't exist. Light is just acting as a particle rather than a wave. That's how it's able to travel through the vacuum. This discovery ripped a proverbial hole in the fabric of the ether. And the debate as to whether light is a particle or wave has been going on for a long, long, long time, even before this luminiferous theory was pushed aside. But physicists landing on the conclusion that it is both really dissolved the theory. And we honestly still don't understand how light fully works. But it's for the most part unanimously agreed upon that this mystical ether does not exist. It can't. And it's through not that it can't, but it just doesn't. And it's through the dualistic properties of light that allow it to defy the vacuum of space. And shameless plug here. If you listened to my last episode about supercomputers and heard me talking about superpositions of qubits, this is kind of a big kind of here, but kind of like how this is working. Like light can act differently and doesn't operate on a fixed set of physics. Not necessarily because of its size, although that does have something to do with it, but it's like how qubits work in a way. It can exist in multiple states at once or change the state it's existing in. I wish there was a blanket of light that I was passing through at all times that was just soaking me with photons and recharging me with photons, that was just like a warm light blanket, a cape. I'd wear it as a cape and I would fly through the vacuum of space, through the nebulas, through the cosmos, and the light would just I'd be a beacon to every extraterrestrial force out there. They would see me and I would call out to them with my light and I would say, I love you. We need you. Save us. And they would say, we're coming. We're coming. We'll find you. We're finding you. And we will save you. We'll save humanity. Thank you for shining the beacon of light with your light blanket. And I'd say, it's our destiny, aliens. Join us here on planet Earth and become one with our light blanket. Our next thing that science got wrong is the miasma theory of disease. And the miasma theory of disease was a widely accepted medical theory that held that diseases were caused by noxious air or miasma. The theory was based on the idea that diseases like cholera and the Black Death and malaria were caused by poisonous emanations from rotting organic material. And you can see this reflected in a plague mask. I feel like everyone knows what a plague mask looks like. It has that huge black bird-looking beak. It's not always black, but usually this big beak mask. And they would fill the big beak with cloves and potpourri and flowers and stuff to make, quote, good air, because people didn't really understand germs. They just thought it was like rotten air. And though miasma theory is typically associated with the spread of contagious diseases, some academics in the early 19th century suggested that the theory extended to other conditions as well, like one could become obese by inhaling the odor of food. And the miasma theory was advanced by Hippocrates in the 4th century BC and accepted from ancient times in Europe and China. But the theory was eventually abandoned by scientists and physicians after 1880, and it was replaced by the germ theory of disease. And it was accepted that germs, not miasma, caused specific diseases. However, cultural beliefs about getting rid of odor made the cleanup of waste a high priority for cities, and it also encouraged the construction of well-ventilated hospitals and schools and other buildings. And also, way back in the day, before germ theory existed, doctors wouldn't wash their hands between seeing patients or doing surgeries. They'd actually let blood stain their aprons, and they just wouldn't wash them, because the more blood you had on your apron meant the more experience you had. And although the connection between germs and disease was proposed quite early, it was not until the late 1800s that the germ theory was generally just overall accepted. The miasmic theory was canceled by this guy named John Snow, suggesting that there was some means by which diseases spread via a poison or a morbid material in water. At first they thought it was like water, bacteria is getting in the water. They didn't really understand the concept of like airborne bacteria yet, but it eventually they did. And this John Snow guy he actually suggested this in response to a cholera epidemic in London in 1854. And then flash forward to 1876, there was this guy named Robert Koch, and he proved that there was this bacteria, anthrax, which brought a definitive end to the miasma theory. It was after he was able to look at it under a microscope and prove that like anthrax is infecting these things and make a direct correlation and publish these papers that people were like, oh, that's definitely a germ. These are germs. Germs are real. Scientists were like, germs exist. I said I was going to talk about this guy earlier, but Louis Pasteur, the guy who gave us pasteurization, I feel like he's worth mentioning in this because he did a lot for the germ movement. He was for the germ theory movement. He was a French chemist, pharmacist, microbiologist. He was renowned for his discoveries of the principles of vaccination, microbial fermentation, and pasteurization. And his work led to huge breakthroughs in the understanding of disease prevention, and that in turn laid down the foundations of hygiene, public health, and a lot of modern medicine. So big ups Louis Pasteur for keeping us safe and teaching everybody about germs. Wash your hands. Just, wash your hands. Wash your butt, wash your face. Not in that order. Wash your face, then your butt, and also wash your hands. And don't, just be safe. To be clean. Be clean. Everybody be clean. As clean as you can. Not too clean. You don't want to be sterile, because that's bad. You don't want to be fully just like sterile, but be clean. Let's get into a segment of the podcast I like to call Let's Ask AI.
Let's ask AI.
Today I asked AI, what things do you think we are doing in the scientific field today that will be considered wrong in the future? And AI responded, this is a fascinating question that invites us to reflect on the potential blind spots in our current scientific understanding and practices. Here are some areas where I think future generations might look back critically. Our understanding of consciousness and the brain. While neuroscience has made tremendous strides, our current models of consciousness and how the brain generates subjective experience may be seen as overly simplistic. Future scientists might view our tendency to equate consciousness with neural activity as missing crucial aspects of subjective experience. AI also said, cancer treatment approaches. While chemotherapy and radiation have saved many lives, future generations may view these as incredibly crude tools that caused unnecessary suffering. They might see them similarly to how we now view other surgical techniques before anesthesia necessary given the tools available, but ultimately primitive and harmful. They went on to say, our model of psychiatric conditions and mental health. The current categorical approach to mental health diagnosis, as codified in systems like the DSM, might be seen as artificially rigid and failing to capture the true spectrum and complexity of human mental states. Our heavy reliance on psychiatric medications may also be viewed as an oversimplified approach to complex psychological phenomena. I heavily agree with that. Environmental impact assessment. Despite increased awareness of ecosystem complexity, we may still be dramatically underestimating how human activities affect natural systems. Future scientists might find our methods of assessing environmental impact woefully inadequate at capturing the true scope of ecological interactions. All of this is very true. AI, I feel like, got it on the nose with we're not going to know what we're doing wrong until we're doing it wrong. And I think that was a good assessment of different fields of reality and how we are probably going to be improving in the future. There's always room for improvement. There's always room to do better. Even if you think you're crushing it, you can always be doing better. There can always be more inclusivity, diversity, compassion. We can always be striving for better, and we always should. Let's get into our last segment of the podcast, and then we'll get out of here. So at the end of each episode, I like to do a list of fun facts. Just a couple fun facts to round things out. And today, to keep things kind of on brand, I guess. I don't know if on brand is the word, but to keep things on aligned with this episode, I decided to do some fun facts that are historical misconceptions. Our first fun fact is regarding the Vikings' horned helmets. Vikings never actually wore horned helmets. There's no evidence of this. And this image was created by a 19th century costume designer, particularly for Wagner's operas. Real Viking helmets were simple, rounded designs. No one wants to hear that. It sucks, but it's an unfortunate historical misconception. Our next fun fact is about diamonds. Until recently, scientists thought that diamonds took millions of years to form, and we now know that they can form in weeks or months under the right conditions, and this insight has even led to lab-grown diamond technology. About to get me a diamond machine. About to be 3D printing diamonds. Let's go. Our next fun fact is about ancient Greek statues. And this one is something you might already know, but if it's not, it makes sense. And it's going to kind of, if you don't already know it, it's going to kind of flip your whole perception of when you think about Greek society, Greek civilizations. Most people picture classical statues as pure white marble, but they actually were painted in bright, vibrant colors, and over time the paint just wore off. Archaeologists have found traces of the original pigments on statues. And our final fun fact, I picked this because of the stress. I picked this because of if you're stressed, maybe it will give you a little bit of relief knowing this next fun fact. But until the 1980s, doctors believed ulcers were caused primarily by stress and spicy foods. Then, Barry Marshall and Robin Warren discovered that most ulcers are actually caused by a bacteria called H. pylori. And like with all things we've talked about today, they were initially met with significant skepticism, but then their discovery became accepted. So if you're feeling stressed out, don't worry, because most likely it's not going to cause an ulcer. So you've got that to look forward to. I cannot imagine all of the things we are currently getting wrong. But time has a way of exposing our errors and teaching us the truth. And who knows, maybe someday we'll swing back to thinking the Earth is the middle of the solar system and that light is actually some other form of material that we don't understand, or that germs and viruses don't work the way that we think that they do. That's usually how it works. We think we know, then we don't know, then we come up with a new theory, and that's wrong, and then it's expanded upon, and then some of that new thing is right, and it's just really interesting the way that science and technology and just how our understanding of reality works. And I'm excited for what we discover in the future. But we've got to stay informed. And we have to be diligent about the accuracy of information we are taking in. But we also have to simultaneously remain open to different perspectives and possibilities, because that's how we grow. We have to be wrong to grow. We have to understand that we don't know everything and that things aren't exactly as they appear a lot of the times. We have to be able to find new truths. Just one last quick reminder about leaving those comments, subscribe, the ratings, the reviews, whatever the thing is on whatever platform you're listening on. There's a way to click a star or leave a note or a comment or whatever. Or if you'd like to check out my Patreon, there is a link for that in the show's notes as well. However you support, thank you, thank you, thank you. Don't forget to check on your mental health, and remember to check on the mental health of your loved ones. Bye.
Thoughts. Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.
Analog thoughts.